Thank you, Tim. That was beautiful. As with most sermon writing processes, I changed my mind about what scriptures I was going to read halfway through the process. So I'm going to read Genesis chapter 21, verses 14 to 21, and Acts chapter 16, verses 11 to 15, if you're following along in the Bible. We begin with Genesis chapter 21. This is the story of Hagar and her relationship with Abraham and Sarah. But I'm going to pick up about halfway through the story. And it goes like this. So Abraham rose early in the morning. He took bread and a skin of water, and he gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with her child Ishmael. And he sent her away. And she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put her child under a bush to shade him, and she left and walked away a great distance, so she could not see her child, because she said to herself, "We're out of water, and I'm not going to watch my child die." And she sat there. She lifted up her voice and she cried, and God heard her and heard the voice of her child. And an angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said, "What troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make a great nation of him." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and she filled the skin with water, and the boy drank. God was indeed with the boy as he grew up, and he lived in the wilderness and became an expert at the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt. And then from Acts, this is Paul telling a story about his travels and a woman named Lydia that he meets along the way in his travels. We set sail from Troas and took a straight course from Samothrace. The following day to Neapolis, and from there Philippi, which was a leading city in the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony. We remained in this city for some days. On the Sabbath day, we went outside the gate by the river, where we supposed there was a place of prayer. We sat down and spoke to the women who had gathered there. A certain woman named Lydia, a worshiper of God, was listening to us. She was from the city of Thyatira and a dealer of purple cloth. The Lord opened her heart to listen eagerly to what was said by Paul. And she and her household were baptized. And she urged them, saying, "If you have judged me a faithful servant of the Lord, come and stay at my house." And she prevailed upon them. That means she convinced them to come stay at her house. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. We begin this morning with lessons from a pregnant woman. Part 1. Sleep is a gift from God. Fall asleep whenever and wherever you can. Do not allow spouses, dogs, or the ice cream truck to stop you from sleeping. Sleep anywhere. Stairs are the enemy. Attempt to have a buddy go up the stairs with you, to stand behind you and push you up. Always know where a restroom is located. It's okay to leave one stop and go to another stop along your day, but make sure both stops have a restroom. Otherwise, proceed home immediately. And finally, your parents are not your parents anymore. They are now grandparents. Even though the baby is not on the outside, it's still their grandchild. You are no longer relevant. You are merely a host for their grandchild. They will buy you anything. They will take you anywhere. They will answer any phone call you make. However, it's not because of you. They are providing for the host of their grandchild. You must accept this now. This is funny because my parents are sitting right there. The other day, they called me from the Lazy Boy store. Would you like a Lazy Boy? It's for the baby. Today is about women. It's about our women, the women of St. Giles, the women of the Presbyterian Church, and these two women that we talk about in the Bible. But it's also a day about gifts, recognizing our gifts and using them to make a difference in the world. In just a few minutes, we will have an installation service for the new officers of the Presbyterian Women's Organization. This service is called Better Together, and it is a reference to these stories in the Bible. Today we are called, both women and men, to examine more deeply the faith of Hagar and Lydia so that we may also examine our own faith more deeply. We are asked to look at the gifts each of these women possessed so that we might look at our own gifts from God. Lydia, we don't know very much about Lydia. This is her whole story in the Bible. We can assume a few things about her based on the context and the information we're given. She's a businesswoman. Now, Scripture never mentions that she had a husband, but we're told that she is a dealer in purple cloth. She has a household, which means she has people living with her at her house. They might be her children, they might be extended family, they might be servants. We don't know. From the tiny bit of information and the historical context, we can deduce a little bit. She most likely was very wealthy. Otherwise, she would not have been able to support a household without a husband. And we know she didn't have a husband because when they say she was a dealer in purple cloth, if she had a husband, they would have said he was the dealer in purple cloth and left her out of the story completely. We know that little tiny bit about her. And we also know that she listened. She just listened. And then she took what she heard. She took her wealth, her influence, her household, and she followed a still small voice of God whispering in her ear. It's very difficult to talk about Hagar in any context because she was very mistreated. It's hard to hear her story and not be a little angry at Abraham and Sarah. It's hard not to see her as a victim. And maybe for a minute or two in this story, she saw herself as a victim. Perhaps for a little while, as she wandered through the desert with her son, running out of water, she was pretty angry herself. And maybe it was the anger, or maybe the fear, the frustration, the desperation that caused her to cry out to God. But it was also in the midst of all these things that God assured her, I have a plan for you. I'm going to use your gifts, yes, even your misfortune. A long time ago, a pastor stood in this pulpit And every Sunday, he told us to do our very best, the best we can do with the gifts and the talents that God has given us. And if we do our best, God will gather up the best of each of us and change the world, make a huge difference in the world. Not just individuals, but all of us together. Our gifts and our talents will be gathered. Like a family, like a people of God, like a people of God in a covenant with God, we can make a difference. Hagar had nothing. She was nothing. She was a servant. But when she cried out to God in her moment of desperation, the response she got is the same response we get when we cry out to God. You are not nothing to me. I will use you. I have a plan for you and your children. Stick with me here. Stay with me. We're going somewhere together. Perhaps Lydia was the opposite of Hagar. She had a lot, but she didn't take it for granted. She listened. She observed. She took action when she knew the time was right. She used her influence and her wealth to change the lives of others, to actually have the Apostle Paul come and stay at her house. She set out to lead her family and her people around her towards God, who was showing love and acceptance to all. Neither of these women could have ever predicted what their gifts might be, and especially to be women of their time, they never would have thought God was going to use them in such a way. They probably never considered a difference that they were going to make in the world. Nothing has changed in that sense. Most of us have no idea how God is going to use us. Many of us have gifts that we haven't even discovered yet. At the beginning of every new year, I make a commitment to myself to discover something new about myself in the year. I guess you could call it a New Year's resolution, but I've never really considered myself good at keeping New Year's resolutions, so I don't call it that. Otherwise, I'm just jinxing myself. I won't be able to do it. So I just consider it a covenant I make with me and God to discover something new about myself every year. And every year for the past 10 years, I've shared this project with my congregation. I've invited you all to do this project with me. But it's very specific, so here's how it's going to work. Today, we're all going to make a commitment together to listen to God's voice in our ear for a whole year. Now, I don't believe that every little whisper in our ear is the voice of God. All you have to do is turn on the news to prove that. We can all agree on that, right? So in order to help us distinguish the voice of God in our ear, I'm going to give each of you a prompt, a jumping off point. As you leave the sanctuary today, you will reach into a basket and you will select a star, a gold star from the basket. Each star has a different word on it. There are over 800 words. I think we got ourselves covered. Everybody's going to get a different word. Now, these words are unique. They're not your average everyday word. Readiness, prudence, recovery, recognition. What in the world? These are strange words. But I assure you, over the next 366 days, because this is a leap year, got an extra day, you will hear God whisper to you what that word means. You will discover something new about yourself. You will discover a gift you had that you didn't know. Now, I don't make a lot of promises as a pastor because I don't know the mind of God. But I will promise you this. If you commit to this project, you will figure it out. It might happen to you tomorrow. You might know immediately when you pull your star out what the word means. Oh my gosh, I was waiting to see this. But it might take you the whole year. One year, my word didn't come to me until December 27th. But I kept it on my desk, and I looked at it every day, and eventually I figured it out. God is going to use all of these things, all of these gifts, all of these revelations, all of these inspirations, and change the world with them. Something new will be discovered in you. This is meant to be personal. You don't have to tell anybody what your word is. You never have to tell anybody what it meant to you. But it is meant to open us up to something new, a new way that God is working with our gifts. When we use our gifts together, we are doing exactly what God has intended for us to do. So I invite you this year to leave here and take a word. Let it inspire you. Let it remind you that you have gifts you may not even know about yet. Think about this word for a whole year. Keep it close by so you will see it and be reminded of it all the time. Now, there are only 2 rules to this project. I have to review these rules every year because my dad tries to break them every year. Okay? You cannot select your own word. You have to reach in blindly and select a word. That means you can't trade your word and give it back. You have to take the word you get. The second rule is simple. Listen. Listen and listen and listen. I don't make a lot of promises, but I promise you'll hear something if you listen. And God is there the whole time, gathering up our gifts to change the world. Amen.